Witness what it's like to be a non-binary pregnant person and then a parent. Hello and welcome back to I'm the Xaddy. Today's episode is called Periods, Pubes and Pit Stains, which is basically three things we're all expected to manage quietly and hide properly and pretend are not happening at all. And I've been thinking a lot about how weird that is. That how normal bodily things get turned into something shameful, something that needs to be fixed, or something we're supposed to control so that other people can stay comfortable. Bodies don't really care about that. They bleed, they sweat, they grow hair, they change shape. They just do whatever they do. Somewhere along the line, we're taught that those things need editing before we're allowed to exist comfortably in the world. And I think this episode is really about that. Periods, body hair, sweat, and what it's like when you start unpicking the shame wrapped around them, especially when your relationship with your body is already shifting through pregnancy, identity, and just life. This episode isn't a how-to guide or how to fix or anything like that. It's more of a can we just talk about it without pretending it's not happening kind of episode. So yeah, let's get into it. My first period came when I was about 13. And like most people, I didn't really understand what it meant beyond the basics. I just remember there being this unspoken rule that it was something to hide. And at school there was always chatter about who had started and who hadn't, as if it meant something about who you were becoming. As if it came with a status or shame attached. And I definitely absorbed the idea that it was dirty. Not always explicitly, but in the way people reacted to it, the way that it was whispered about and hidden away and managed quietly. But that view for me has changed a lot over the years. I now understand periods as completely normal, a necessary part of the reproductive system, and especially now being pregnant, I can see more clearly what my body was actually doing every month. But my relationship with them has shifted in stages. Because before pregnancy, I used a menstrual cup, and for me, that made everything feel more distant, manageable. It meant that I could go about my life without constantly thinking about my period as this very female coded experience. It was just something my body did and I didn't have to engage with it. But during fertility treatment, that changed. For those months, I couldn't use my cup. I had to use pads again, which meant I was suddenly very aware of everything. How much I was bleeding, what it meant, what stage of the cycle I was in, whether this was going to be another negative test. And there was grief in that, quiet monthly grief. But there was also confusion in that because I had to get used to my own bodily systems all over again. Each cycle wasn't just a period, it was a reminder of what had not happened. And I don't think people talk about that part of fertility treatment enough. The emotional layering that happens when your cycle becomes evidence of loss. But obviously now I'm pregnant, I don't have periods at all. And in a strange way, that's been peaceful. A break from thinking about it entirely. A break from witnessing my own body in that way. I've ended up having to witness it in a very different way. And I know that relationship will change again post-birth because of the bleeding and the first period afterwards, whatever that looks like. Because nothing about this is fixed. But what I do know is that before being pregnant, I didn't really experience the discomfort with my periods physically or mentally. And it's more about what they meant to me and what they represented societally. Because to me, obviously, they feel really gendered and over-labelled, like they belong to a version of me that doesn't fully fit how I see myself, which is why I use the menstrual cup to try and distance myself from that system. not having to buy tampons or pads and be part of that very female orientated monthly experience. But I can hold the truth that they are part of what made it possible for us to create our child. And both things can be true at once, it's just complicated. People sometimes assume that because I'm non binary, I must hate every aspect of the body I was born with. But it's never really been true for me. There are parts that I feel uncomfortable in and parts I really like. Being pregnant has definitely made me feel more at peace with my physical body because I know it's doing a job. I know it's performing an act of service to me and my partner. And it definitely changes how I see it as a whole. And I appreciate it in a totally different way now. Let's talk about body hair. Body hair for me has always been more about policing than anything natural. The message I absorbed growing up was very clear that hair removal equals cleanliness and visibility equals neglect. You were supposed to be smooth, maintained, and controlled. And I remember the smell of Veet vividly. It's one of those sensory memories that just sticks and has never left. And looking back, it feels like such a strange expectation to place on bodies, especially when it's so gendered. Hair on men is normal, even attractive. Hair on women is something to manage, remove, and get rid of. It never really made sense to me. But for me personally, I'm not especially hairy. But that's never really been the point. It's more about the sensation for me. So when things get longer, they feel more irritating, and that's what I respond to. That's why I shave. It's not how they look. But what's interesting is that leaving my body hair alone doesn't make me feel more masculine, and removing it doesn't make me feel more feminine. Hair itself has never felt gendered to me. Society, for me, is what genders it. And pregnancy has made that even more complicated, purely in a practical sense. Reaching certain areas has become much harder, so the relationship becomes more about function than anything else. And I'll sometimes say to my partner that I should shave my legs before I wear shorts. And she'll say, if someone is looking at your legs that closely, we've got bigger problems. And do you know what? She's totally right. Because it always brings me back to the same question. Who is this actually for? Because when I strip it back, it isn't really about gender for me. Removing or leaving body hair doesn't make me feel more or less like myself. Hair isn't gendered. The expectations around it are. And I think that's where this gets interesting in a non-binary context, because people often assume there's a correct way to look. Like non-binary people are supposed to land somewhere in between masculine and feminine in a very visible, readable way. Sometimes it feels like non-binary people escape one set of expectations only to be handed another. And suddenly you're expected to look androgynous enough or queer enough to prove your identity. But that's just another form of policing other people's bodies. For me, being non-binary isn't about performing androgyny. It's about not having to perform at all. And pregnancy has made that even clearer. There's less energy for presentation, less capacity for maintenance, and in some ways it's been really liberating. And I'm enjoying the journey that this is taking me on. Let's talk about sweat. Sweat is probably the most universal of all these things, and also the one we shame the most, quietly. Sweat is literally our bodies regulating temperature and keeping us alive. Yet we've somehow decided it's embarrassing, and again, it's always kind of fascinated me. We're constantly taught that sweating equals being unclean and unprofessional and undesirable, and something that should be hidden at all costs. But I've always been a sweaty person. I run hot, and then you add pregnancy hormones into that, and it's just turned everything up a notch. Pregnancy for me has made it impossible to pretend that I'm perfectly put together all of the time. And oddly, it's been freeing. I felt more able to let things go and not judge myself for it, and not judge anyone else for it either, because it's just human. I had to change how I dress and how often I wash and how I think about temperature in general. Not in a dramatic way, just in a very practical, everyday way. And at first, I found it quite hard and felt unclean, and that I had to wash constantly, and felt really conscious about it all. Because it was a change that my body was going through, and I had to get used to it. And over time, it became normal to deal with. And I think that's what shifted the most in realizing how much effort people put into pretending that this isn't happening. Pretending they don't sweat and don't smell and don't have bodies doing very normal, regular things. But sweat is literally your body keeping you alive and cooling you down and balancing you out. It's one of the least shameful processes we have, and yet we treat it like a failure. And I've started to stop thinking of it as something I have to manage for other people. It's for me to make me feel comfortable. And ultimately, it's just something that my body does. So the more I sit with all of this, the more I realise it really isn't about periods and pubes and pit stains at all. It's about control. It's about how we're taught that bodies should be edited into something acceptable before they're allowed to exist in public. But bodies bleed, and they're capable of creating life. Humans grow hair because evolution has taught us that. They sweat because they're trying to cool us down, because evolution has taught us that. And none of those things are failures. None of them are dirty. They're just evidence that our bodies are doing exactly what they should be doing. So that's periods, pubes, and pit stains. I hope this gave you something to think about, or at least made you feel a little less weird about something your body is doing that's very, very normal. And as always, if you want to get in touch, please do get in touch at imthexaddy.com or DM me on Instagram at imthexaddy.pod. Thank you for listening. I'll speak to you next time. Peace.